So today, let me just put down my clapper, we are going to talk about the history of psychological testing and psychometrics. So the history of psychometrics is a long one, and the origins of it is a really interesting story and has a lot of relevance to present-day practices. After all, contemporary tests didn't just magically appear from a vacuum. They evolved slowly, and developed is probably a better word, from a host of precursors that were introduced over the last 100 years. So accordingly, this module is going to feature kind of a broad review of some of the historical roots of present-day psychological tests. We're going to start with some of the earliest examples. These are the imperial examinations from the Chinese Empire, or I guess we'll talk on the Han Dynasty, the Ming Dynasty. Those are the two big ones. And then we'll kind of, after taking a brief look at that, we will talk about how European nations had some early uses and kind of actually appropriated a lot of the system in the later centuries before focusing on the more modern origin story that occurred approximately a century or so ago. And in that modern origin story, we'll talk about kind of an interest in individual differences. We'll cover a lot of Darwin and Galton. Then we'll talk about some experimental psychologists who have been interested in measures of individual differences in reaction time and whatnot. Then we'll talk about the study of mental deficiency, which fostered and kind of facilitated the field we know today. Then I'll talk a bit about the history of intelligence testing and personality testing. So let's dive in. So, although the widespread use of psych testing is largely a phenomenon of the 20th century, historians have found that rudimentary forms of testing date back to at least 2020 BC, when the Chinese emperor had his officials examined every third year or so to determine their fitness for office. Now, this evidence is pretty scattered, but by the time we get to the Han Dynasty, which is approximately, depending on who you ask, is between 200 and 200, so 200 BC to 200 AD, there are different dates. I even have like 5 different ones in my notes. And the testing that initiated had been modified and refined over the centuries, essentially until written exams. So on these exams, they covered 5 big topics. And these topics were civil law, military affairs, agriculture, revenue, and geography. Yep, I got all those. And there would be kind of multiple test batteries to initialize those. Now, they did away with this imperial testing system around 1906-ish. So these are some of the older, or the last standing examination cells. So the one on the left is from, I think that's Nanjing. I have it written down. Yeah. At the South River School, and the design of these cells was to prevent cheating in exams. Now, the one on the right is a photograph from 1899 of examination cells as well, to give you kind of a sense of there was infrastructure here. Now, the Chinese examination system really developed into this multi-stage testing process by around the Ming Dynasty. So that's the 14th century and on. Candidates, and actually this figure here shows candidates gathering around the wall to see and this is the wall where all the results were going to be posted. This announcement was called Releasing the Roll. I think this figure is from about 1540, so right in the heart of the Ming Dynasty. Now, but let's back up and actually talk about this. So, the Chinese examination system took its final form in around the 1370s, where proficiency in the Confucian classics was emphasized. So this is a multi-stage testing process. In the preliminary examination, candidates were required to spend an entire day and night in a small isolated booth like you saw earlier, composing essays on assigned topics and writing a poem. Now, of those, so that's at the district level, only about 1 to 7% passed this first test. And then that's where they moved up to the district level exams. First we have local, then district, which required 3 separate sessions over 3 days and nights. Now, obviously, this system is pretty grueling and puts a lot of our current standardized testing in context. It could be worse. But this isn't the final level. So of those that pass, so only between 1 and 10% passed the district level exam, which then allowed them the privilege to go to Peking for the final round of examinations. So at this point, only about 3% of those attempting the test at the final round would pass and become mandarins. In other words, being eligible for public office. So, although this system was developed with a lot of detailed assessment and multi-stages, its resemblance to modern-day testing is kind of superficial. Because, so these testing practices were unnecessarily grueling, but also the Chinese failed to validate their selection procedures. So, it's not like they could test predictive success. They didn't do that. It was just you passed or not. And so, but it does appear that if we look at the specific testing criteria, or how they were evaluated, that some of the examination program did incorporate relevant selection criteria. So, for example, in the written exams, penmanship and the beauty of such penmanship was given scores. So, regardless of the quality of the writing, if you needed the pen, it needed to look nice. So, and if we look at Chinese forms from around this time, there's a lot of stylistic features in the written form. So good penmanship is obviously essential for clear, exact communication. So it makes sense why they'd include it. But that aspect, while it's relevant, isn't explicitly in the tests. So, but in general, over the years, by the time we get to 1906, there's such widespread discontent with this system, because essentially, in order to pass, you needed to be studying all the time and be able to take time off from whatever your job is in order to do this. And so therefore, there's a big socioeconomic divide here in those that are even able to take the test and not. So because of that widespread discontent, the system was abolished by royal decree in 1906. Now, these imperial examinations gave a lot of inspiration to European nations, including the British East India Company. So in 1832, they essentially copied the system of testing to select employees for overseas duty. And you would have to write essays on British law and things like that. But so that same level of extensiveness as well as economic privilege. So by the time we get to 1855, the British government adopts this company selection procedure. And shortly after, France and Germany, or the German states, follow and do this as well. By 1883, the United States establishes the American Civil Service Commission and develops and administers competitive examinations for government service jobs. The Yeah. So that's it for not all of his, we've got a whole module, but that's kind of like the precursor, like the prequels to psychological testing as we know it today. So I'll see you later. Bye!